Good afternoon. Nehemiah Griego was just 15 when he murdered his family, including his 3 younger brothers and sisters. He could be back out on the streets in 2 months when he turns 21. But today, the Attorney General made his case for why he should stay behind bars.
Some crimes shatter the very foundation of a family. But when kids, the ones meant to carry on their parents' legacy, become the killers, the betrayal cuts even deeper. One teenager took deadly revenge over something so trivial, it'll leave you speechless. This story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family. Let's dive in.
Yes, he owned a dog, and he loved that dog to death. I also have a 3-year-old sister, and I would let him watch her when I was busy doing something else. Ooh. He is very sad that something like this would happen. He is trying to figure out himself why he's done it. He's not sure.
On December 19, 2013, in Norfolk, Virginia, 16-year-old Vincent Parker shocked an entire community with a brutal act of violence inside his family's modest home. Vincent, described by his classmates and teachers as polite and well-behaved, carried out a crime so shocking that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand the depths of his rage. By the end of that day, both of Vincent's parents, Carol and Wayne Parker, were dead. But the reason behind this unimaginable betrayal wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't about revenge over years of abuse or neglect. According to Vincent, the motive was something almost trivial. He was angry because his parents had taken away his iPod.
A Norfolk teen will spend at least a quarter of a century in prison for stabbing his own parents to death. Police say Vincent Parker was just 16 at the time of the alleged crime. Officers found Wayne and Carol Parker dead in their home on Bland Street in December.
The Parkers were a tight-knit, church-going family. Carol, 57, was known for her kind nature and strict parenting style, while Wayne, 55, worked tirelessly to support his family. Together, they had raised Vincent to value discipline, education, and responsibility.
Vincent Parker is shown at a young age with his parents, Carol and Wayne. The picture relatives say of what they thought was a happy family. That was until last December when Vincent, a 16-year-old honor student, brutally beat and stabbed his parents to death.
To those who knew him, Vincent appeared to be a model son. He excelled in school, had a clean record, and was often described as respectful and quiet. But behind the scenes, tensions were building. Vincent's parents had grown increasingly strict, especially when it came to his use of electronics. They felt that devices like his iPod and phone were distracting him from schoolwork and family responsibilities. In the days leading up to the crime, Vincent's parents had punished him for poor behavior by taking away his iPod. This seemingly small action unleashed a growing frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. While his parents believed they were teaching him a lesson, Vincent saw their discipline as controlling and unfair. His anger reached a boiling point, and on that December day, he made a horrifying decision to take revenge.
He is a smart young man. Yeah, he is smart in school. Don't know what happened to cause this occur.
That afternoon, Vincent left school early and returned to his family home. His mother, Carol, was the first to face his wrath. As she stood in the upstairs bathroom, Vincent sprayed her with pepper spray, blinding and disorienting her. He then grabbed a wooden bat and struck her repeatedly, the blows so violent that she collapsed on the bathroom floor. But Vincent wasn't done. He picked up a knife and stabbed her in the chest multiple times, leaving her lifeless body in a pool of blood. Minutes later, Wayne Parker came home from work. As he entered the house, Vincent ambushed him. Armed with a crowbar, Vincent struck his father repeatedly and then stabbed him. Despite his critical injuries, Wayne managed to stumble out of the house and call 911, gasping for help.
Police recovered several knives, a baseball bat, and a crowbar. Court papers show the teen told police afterwards he, quote, just got mad and went off. I just remember getting mad. It's all from my dad.
When first responders arrived, they found Wayne bleeding heavily outside the house. He was rushed to the hospital but tragically died shortly after. Inside, police discovered Carol's lifeless body in the bathroom. Blood splattered the walls, floors, and furniture, a chilling testament to the violence that had occurred.
It was premeditated. He had no mercy. Vincent Parker, he despised his parents.
He and his family hope that one day Parker will understand how many lives he's affected.
Vincent didn't attempt to flee the scene. Instead, he calmly admitted to the crime, telling police what he had done and why. His confession left everyone in disbelief.
Stephanie, Vincent Parker is being tried as an adult. He was in shackles and handcuffs in court and had no real emotion when he pleaded guilty. Alan Taylor of Elizabeth City leaves court after his 16-year-old grandson, Vincent Parker, pleaded guilty to killing Taylor's daughter, Carol, and his son-in-law, Wayne.
Vincent's reasoning behind the murder sent shockwaves through the courtroom. He told police that he was angry because his parents had taken away his iPod and punished him over minor disagreements. Prosecutors painted Vincent as cold and calculating, describing how he meticulously planned the attack on his mother and father. Vincent pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for both killings. During his sentencing, he expressed remorse for his actions, but the damage was already done. In 2014, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a punishment that divided opinions. Some believed the sentence was fair, given the horrific nature of the crime, while others questioned whether a teenager could fully comprehend the weight of such actions.
I feel that he killed his parents because he wanted to have his own lifestyle. He wanted to be able to do what he wanted to do.
An uncle, overcome with emotion after testifying, lunged at the teen. And at that point, deputies restrained him and Parker was whisked from the courtroom unharmed.
The courtroom was filled with grief and disbelief as the Parkers' friends and family struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Carol and Wayne were remembered as loving, hardworking parents who had done everything they could to give Vincent a good life. The fact that their son had turned against them in such a violent way was almost too much to bear.
I don't know what happened myself. I'm sure he can't remember what happened. So we just ask God to pray for him.
Vincent himself appeared remorseful in court, apologizing for his actions and expressing regret for the pain he had caused. But for those who knew the Parkers, the loss of two kind-hearted people in such a senseless act left a scar that could never heal.
I know sorry may not be enough to justify what I did, but I'm sorry for what I did to both you and your dad. You and Dad. I would give my life for you two to be alive again. You and Dad were and still are the best mom and dad in the world. Mom, I want to thank you for bringing me into this world. Well, I'll see you soon. Happy Mother's Day to the best mother in the world. I miss you and Dad so much.
To this day, the case serves as a chilling reminder of how unchecked anger and resentment can spiral into devastating violence, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions. The next case takes us to Canada, where a young woman's calculated lies and cold manipulation led to a horrifying betrayal.
The real-life horror story that happened inside the Pan family's home shattered the serenity of their normally quiet, upscale neighborhood.
On a chilly November night in 2010, a quiet neighborhood in Markham, Ontario was shattered by a violent home invasion. For Jennifer Pan, it should have been the most terrifying night of her life. Masked intruders burst into her family's home, tied her up, and shot her parents in cold blood before fleeing into the darkness. But when investigators began to untangle the web of events, the horrifying truth surfaced. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a meticulously planned attack, and the mastermind behind it was Jennifer herself.
The Pans were the epitome of an immigrant success story. Han Pan and his wife Bic were Vietnamese boat people who escaped to find a better life.
Jennifer Pan's parents, Bic Ha and Han Pan, had always pushed their children to succeed. As Vietnamese immigrants, they had built a life in Canada through hard work and determination, and they expected the same from Jennifer. They monitored her grades, chose her extracurriculars, and even controlled who she could be friends with. For Jennifer, the pressure was relentless. She was expected to become a straight-A student, a concert pianist, and a shining example of success.
And daughter Jennifer was an Olympic-caliber figure skater, an award-winning pianist, and a straight-A student.
His daughter, he wanted to be a doctor, eventually changing that to a pharmacist because he said that she didn't have the stomach for it.
But by her late teens, Jennifer's grades were slipping. Instead of admitting her struggles to her parents, she created an elaborate web of lies. She forged report cards, fabricated university acceptance letters, and even pretended to have a job at a prestigious hospital. To her parents, Jennifer was living the life they had dreamed for her. But in reality, she was struggling to keep up the facade.
He blamed a lot of her behavior on what's known in popular culture as tiger parenting.
Tiger parenting is common in Asian culture. It's described as tough love, some say bordering on tyranny.
She was caught in multiple lies. She was caught out living with him. She was caught out not attending university. She was eventually locked in her home.
Her parents basically put her on lockdown when they figured out what she was up to.
Yes.
The conflict between Jennifer and her parents intensified when they discovered she was secretly dating a man they disapproved of, Daniel Wong. They forbade her from seeing him, going as far as taking away her phone and restricting her freedom. Trapped in a world of her own lies and desperate to be with Daniel, Jennifer made a chilling decision. If her parents wouldn't let her live the life she wanted, she would make sure they were no longer a part of it.
You could see three shadowy figures come into the house together.
What did they say when they walked in?
They asked for money.
Over the course of several months, Jennifer began orchestrating a plan with Daniel and his friends to have her parents killed. On the night of November 8, 2010, the plan was put into motion. At around 10 p.m., Jennifer unlocked the front door of her family home, allowing 3 masked men to enter. She staged the scene to make it look like a robbery, tying herself to a banister with a scarf to appear as though she was a victim.
Some people broke into our house and they showed us all his money. And I could hear my parents yelling downstairs, please send help.
The men made their way upstairs, where they found Bick and Han in their bedroom. After ransacking the house for valuables to sell the illusion of a break-in, the men forced Jennifer's parents down to the basement. There, Han was shot twice, but miraculously he survived. Bick, however, was shot and killed, her lifeless body left on the cold concrete floor.
Moments later, that grainy security video shows the killers taking off. For some reason, they spared Jennifer's life, and she dials 911.
Jennifer, still pretending to be a victim, called 911, speaking calmly but with just enough emotion to sell the story. She told the operator about the robbery and how the men had tied her up before attacking her parents. But cracks in her story began to show almost immediately.
What's your name?
My name is Jennifer.
Someone just broke in?
Someone broke in and I heard shots like pops. I don't know what's happening. I'm tied upstairs.
Does it sound like gunshots?
I don't know what a gunshot sounds like. I just heard a pop.
The investigation into the Pan family home invasion didn't take long to unravel Jennifer's lies. Han, who survived the attack, provided a crucial piece of evidence. He recalled seeing Jennifer speaking calmly to one of the intruders, an interaction that didn't match her story of being a helpless victim.
When they get to the house, they find Jennifer tied up exactly the way she described. That raises more than a few eyebrows.
She's telling the 911 operator that she is tied to the banister, but she's also making the call on her cell phone.
Detectives also began to notice inconsistencies in Jennifer's account of the night. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood showed no sign of the intruders, and her demeanor during police interviews raised red flags. Under pressure, Jennifer eventually confessed, revealing that she had been the mastermind behind the attack.
So $10,000, 3 guys will come in, kill the parents, make it look like a home invasion.
Yeah, and that was the initial agreement.
All you have to do is tell me that you were involved, right? You know it, we know it, it's plain as day. I'm 100% correct here.
In 2014, Jennifer Pan was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years.
A judge later sentenced Jennifer and the 3 others to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
At first, she had no reaction, but as the news sunk in, she broke down.
Jennifer, Daniel, and 2 of the gunmen are sentenced to life in prison. The 3rd gunman pleads guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Jennifer also receives a non-communication order, meaning she can never speak to anyone in her family again.
The courtroom during Jennifer Pan's trial was a mix of shock, grief, and anger. Han Pan, still recovering from his injuries, testified against his own daughter, his voice trembling as he recounted the betrayal. Friends and family struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, obedient girl they thought they knew with the chilling reality of her actions. Prosecutors painted Jennifer as manipulative and cold, willing to destroy her family to live the life she wanted. But the defense argued that years of parental pressure had created a deep sense of resentment and desperation. For the Pan family, however, the damage was irreparable. Bick Ha was gone, and the father who had once loved Jennifer unconditionally now saw her as a stranger. Jennifer's actions left scars that would never heal, not just on her family, but on the entire community. Even years later, the case remains a chilling reminder of how far someone can go when pushed to the brink. The next case takes us to Idaho, where a 16-year-old girl's obsession with her boyfriend led her to commit a crime so shocking it tore her family apart.
And she came running out bawling, says, "They think I did it."
A teenage girl stands trial for murder, while her family watches and wonders. No one could have imagined what would happen after they tried to end the relationship. Diane and Alan were murdered.
In the early morning hours of September 2nd, 2003, a quiet home in Bellevue, Idaho became the site of an unthinkable crime. Alan and Diane Johnson, known for their kindness and strong family ties, were brutally murdered in their own house. But this wasn't the work of an unknown intruder. The truth behind the murders shocked the entire town. It wasn't a stranger who took their lives. It was their own 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Marie Johnson. What could drive a teenager to commit such a horrific act? As investigators dug deeper into Sarah's life, they uncovered a story of love, rebellion, and betrayal that left a community forever scarred.
She was very vivacious, very curious, very loving, very loyal. You couldn't have a better friend than Diana.
I always looked up to Alan and copied him, and he was always just a really great, honest, straightforward guy.
To outsiders, the Johnson family seemed like the picture of stability. Alan was a hard-working ranch manager, and Diane was a loving homemaker who was deeply involved in her church. But beneath the surface, there was tension brewing.
Parents know to expect problems when their kids become teenagers. And Diane and Alan Johnson's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, have presented them with a very big problem. A boyfriend they thought was wrong for her.
At the heart of the conflict was Sarah's relationship with Bruno Santos, a 19-year-old man her parents strongly disapproved of. Alan and Diane believed he was a bad influence on their daughter, not only because of his age, but also due to his troubled past. They forbade Sarah from seeing him, taking her phone away and grounding her in an effort to keep them apart.
He was a high school dropout and was selling drugs, and she came from this really nice family. It just didn't seem like it was right.
But Sarah was deeply infatuated with Bruno. To her, their relationship was everything, and her parents' attempts to end it felt like an attack on her freedom. The more they tried to control her, the more resentment grew. Sarah began to see her parents not as protectors, but as obstacles standing in the way of her happiness.
I know she had problems with my mom. One day it'd be fine, and then as fast as you could snap your finger, all hell would raise loose, and there'd be yelling and screaming.
By the summer of 2003, Sarah's frustration had turned into something darker. She started confiding in friends about how much she hated her parents and even hinted that she wanted them gone. At first, her words seemed like empty teenage rebellion, but they were far more than that. Sarah wasn't just angry, she was planning.
911, what is your emergency? 2 gunshots.
Alan and Diane Johnson were brutally executed in their home.
On the morning of September 2nd, 2003, Sarah put her plan into motion. While her parents slept peacefully in their home, Sarah retrieved her father's .264 caliber rifle, which she had hidden the night before. At around 6:20 a.m., she walked into her parents' bedroom and shot her mother, Diane, as she lay in bed. Alan woke up to the sound of the gunshot, only to be confronted by Sarah in the hallway. Before he could react, Sarah fired again, killing him instantly. The house was eerily silent as Sarah stood there, the rifle still in her hands. But instead of calling for help or fleeing, she calmly began staging the scene. She dragged her mother's body out of the bedroom and covered it with a blanket. Then she left the rifle outside near the guest house, trying to make it look like an intruder had committed the crime.
Diane shot in the head while sleeping. Alan hit in the chest while in the shower. Their daughter Sarah, sounding terrified, says she was alone in her bedroom when it all happened.
Once everything was in place, Sarah ran to a neighbor's house, pretending to be hysterical. She told them she had just come home to find her parents murdered. The neighbors immediately called the police, who arrived on the scene within minutes.
Panicked and hysterical, fled to a neighbor's, where they called police.
There have been 2 gunshots in the bedroom.
So you get here.
At first, Sarah's act seemed convincing. She played the role of the grieving daughter well, crying and clinging to her story of a mysterious intruder. But as investigators examined the evidence, her story began to fall apart.
Right out here on the street.
Inside that garbage can, bullets from the Winchester rifle, a left-handed leather glove, and a right-handed latex glove, all containing someone's DNA.
Detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies in Sarah's version of events. The rifle, which had been left outside, was too clean to have been handled by an intruder in a panic. There were no signs of forced entry, and the timeline Sarah provided didn't add up. As they dug deeper, police uncovered her motive. Sarah's parents had been planning to send her away to live with relatives to keep her away from Bruno Santos. To Sarah, this was the ultimate betrayal, and she decided that the only way to stay with Bruno was to eliminate the people standing in her way.
What were you feeling for your sister who just went through this?
If this rang true, if this is what happened, that's just horrible. I would be sad to be in a house when that happened.
Poor Sarah.
Yeah.
16 years old.
Of course.
At this point, you're all in mourning and...
When confronted with the evidence, Sarah eventually confessed. Her trial began in 2005, and the details of the crime horrified the courtroom. Prosecutors argued that Sarah's actions were cold and calculated, while her defense team claimed she had acted out of desperation and emotional instability.
There is something going on here. I mean, most 16-year-olds would be hiding. They would not want to sit there on the fence and watch their parents come out in body bags. No way.
After weeks of testimony, the jury found Sarah guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole, a sentence that sparked debate over whether a teenager should face such a harsh punishment.
Guilty on both counts of first-degree murder.
That was probably one of the single hardest points.
It's undescribable. It really is, the heartache and the sorrow.
At first, it's just, you can't believe it. It's something that's so...
Your sisters say that she hated your mother.
Constantly.
You testified that Sarah hated your mother, that she actually said this.
Yes.
She actually,
Several times, yes.
You heard her say that?
Uh-huh.
The emotional toll of Sarah's crime was immeasurable. Alan and Diane's family and friends filled the courtroom, their grief visible as they listened to the details of the murders. Many described Sarah as a sweet and caring girl before she met Bruno Santos, struggling to understand how she could have committed such a horrific act.
Showing a guilty mind.
While her anguished relatives looked on, prosecutors presented grim details of the killing and the evidence.
Sarah was crying, and her defense team had probably told her to hope for the best but expect the worst, and I think that's what she was doing.
Sarah herself showed little emotion during the trial, her face remaining calm even as her fate was sealed. But for the people of Bellevue, the crime left a deep scar. The Johnsons had been pillars of their small community, and their loss was felt by everyone who knew them. To this day, Sarah's case remains one of the most shocking examples of a child turning against their own parents. It's a chilling reminder of how love, obsession, and rebellion can combine to create devastating consequences. The next case takes us to Texas, where a 16-year-old boy turned his family's peaceful home into the scene of a shocking tragedy.
Now to another big story. A day after A.J. Armstrong was found guilty of murdering his parents, and his family members say they are left devastated and in disbelief.
The murders of Antonio Sr. and Dawn Armstrong in their own home in 2016 as they slept is an absolute tragedy. Family members say they now have the added pain of a jury finding their son, Antonio Armstrong Jr., guilty of shooting his parents to death when he was 16 years old.
In the early hours of July 29, 2016, the quiet suburban home of Antonio and Dawn Armstrong in Houston, Texas was shattered by gunfire. The couple, known for their devotion to family and faith, were brutally murdered as they slept in their bedroom. Their teenage son, A.J. Armstrong, made the chilling 911 call, claiming someone had broken into their home. But as investigators dug deeper, they found no signs of forced entry. What they uncovered instead was a tangled web of evidence pointing to a shocking truth. The prime suspect was their own 16-year-old son.
Antonio and Dawn Armstrong were the kind of couple other couples envied. They had it all: a tight-knit family, 3 accomplished children, leaders in their church, savvy entrepreneurs, owners of a small chain of gyms.
Antonio and Dawn Armstrong were pillars of their community. Antonio, a former NFL player turned businessman, and Dawn, a devoted mother and fitness enthusiast, were admired for their strong Christian values and parenting. They poured their love and energy into raising their 3 children, especially their youngest, Antonio Armstrong Jr., better known as AJ. To the outside world, the Armstrong family seemed perfect, but behind closed doors, tensions between AJ and his parents had been growing. Antonio and Dawn were known to enforce strict rules, often clashing with their teenage son over his behavior, grades, and the company he kept. AJ had reportedly been struggling in school and had been disciplined for sneaking out and partying late at night.
AJ didn't react as months of private text messages to his mom and dad were shown and read to a jury. Strangers who will ultimately decide, was AJ just a normal kid acting out, or a 16-year-old killer sick of taking heat from his parents?
These disagreements escalated in the months leading up to the murders. According to testimony later presented in court, AJ felt suffocated by his parents' rules and was harboring resentment towards them. That resentment came to a head on a fateful summer night when AJ made a decision that would tear his family apart forever.
Remember in the 911 he says, I heard 2 gunshots.
Any medical attention needed?
I heard gunshots. I don't even know. I went down the stairs, saw a crack in my parents' door.
At 1:40 a.m. on July 29, 2016, police received a frantic 911 call from AJ, claiming he had heard gunshots and that someone had broken into the family's home. Officers arrived to find Antonio Armstrong Sr. and Dawn Armstrong lying in their bed, both shot in the head. Dawn was pronounced dead at the scene, while Antonio Sr. was rushed to the hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries hours later.
Say like 6 feet, maybe, somewhere around there. I couldn't give you like an age range. I didn't really get to see his face or anything like that.
So for him to go to that, to all of a sudden, oh, there was a masked man in my house and I needed to go get my sister, to me and John, I think too, was one of the biggest inconsistencies.
Investigators immediately noticed inconsistencies in AJ's story. There were no signs of forced entry or robbery. Instead, they found a .22 caliber pistol, believed to be the murder weapon, in AJ's bedroom. Nearby, they discovered a note that read, "I've been watching you." AJ claimed the note was left by the intruder, but police found no evidence to support his claims.
There was somebody else in the house that night, and to know that this is something I'm being accused of just makes everything so much worse.
Police say there were no signs of a break-in.
Is his father's blood on his clothes when, according to the defendant, he never went in and checked on them?
During questioning, AJ's behavior raised suspicions. He remained calm and collected, offering explanations that didn't align with the evidence. Investigators pieced together a timeline that painted a chilling picture. AJ had allegedly waited until his parents were asleep, retrieved the gun from his father's belongings, and shot them at close range. He then staged the scene to look like a break-in, placing the note and calling 911 to divert suspicion.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Antonio Armstrong Jr., guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
AJ was charged with capital murder just days after the killings. His trial became one of the most closely watched cases in Houston, drawing intense media attention and dividing public opinion.
Now, we want to remind you that it took 3 trials for a jury to convict Armstrong. He's now serving a life sentence for the 2016 murders of his mother and father at their home in Bel Air.
The prosecution argued that AJ's motive stemmed from resentment and anger towards his parents, particularly his father, who had disciplined him harshly for his behavior. They presented evidence that tied AJ to the murder weapon and pointed out inconsistencies in his alibi.
Deserves far more than to have his future determined based on faulty, unreliable.
The defense, however, painted a different picture. They argued that AJ was a loving son who had been traumatized by the deaths of his parents. They claimed the investigation was flawed, pointing to issues with the handling of DNA evidence and suggesting the possibility of another suspect.
AJ has now been sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years.
God will find a way. I'm convinced of that.
After years of delays and multiple trials, AJ was convicted of capital murder in 2023. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. The case continued to spark controversy, with AJ's legal team filing appeals based on alleged mishandling of evidence.
At the core of this case, when you look past the claims and evidence and opinions, are 3 heartbroken parents.
They were amazing. They were 2 amazing people.
The courtroom was filled with heartbreak during AJ's sentencing. Friends and family of Antonio and Dawn described the immense pain of losing 2 beloved members of their community. Antonio Sr. had been a mentor to many, using his NFL experience to inspire youth, while Dawn was remembered as a kind and devoted mother who always put her family first. AJ maintained his innocence throughout the trial, a stance that divided the community. Some believed he was a misunderstood teen who had been wrongfully accused, while others saw the evidence as irrefutable.
I have to ask you just one time, did you kill your parents?
No. Never. Never.
What do you want to say to them?
I mean, for me, it's as simple as I didn't do it.
For the Armstrong family, the tragedy left a void that could never be filled. The case remains a haunting reminder of how quickly family bonds can unravel, leaving behind devastation and unanswered questions. The next case takes us to Pennsylvania, where a family's peaceful farmhouse became the site of a horrifying crime.
A civil rights lawsuit has been filed against the Pennsylvania State Police over the arrest and murder conviction of 11-year-old Jordan Brown. Brown was convicted of shooting and killing his father's pregnant fiancée.
Child killer accused of a shocking crime at the age of 11.
It was the brutal crime and shocking arrest that garnered national headlines.
On a cold February morning in 2009, in the small rural town of Wampum, Pennsylvania, an unthinkable tragedy unfolded that would spark over a decade of legal battles, shattered lives, and unanswered questions. Inside a farmhouse, 11-year-old Jordan Brown was accused of committing an act so chilling, it shocked not only his family, but an entire nation.
He was Kenzie's fiancé, the father of her expectant child. And one more thing, Brown is also the father of the suspected killer, 12-year-old Jordan Brown.
His father's pregnant fiancée, 26-year-old Kenzie Hoke, was found shot in her bed. Her unborn child tragically lost as well. And as investigators pieced together the events of that morning, their attention turned to Jordan, the young boy who many believed had no capacity for such violence. But what truly happened that day? And how did an accusation turn into one of the most controversial legal sagas in recent history?
What do you see in this mugshot?
I see somebody who just committed a murder. That's why there's a mugshot.
With his son facing life without the possibility of parole.
The morning of February 20th, 2009 started like any other. Kenzie Hoke, who was 8 months pregnant, was home with her 2 daughters, Janessa 7 and Adeline 4, while Jordan prepared for school. Jordan, the son of Kenzie's fiancé, Chris Brown, had recently moved into the farmhouse with his father.
This is Jordan Brown when he was still a typical 5th grader. Quarterback of the Pee Wee football team, the Warriors, coached by his father Chris, a single dad.
But beneath the surface, tensions were quietly building. Kenzie's family later claimed that Jordan harbored resentment towards Kenzie and her pregnancy. believing that the arrival of a new baby would push him out of his father's attention.
And a new sibling was on the way. Chris and Kenzie were eagerly awaiting a baby together, a boy they had already named Christopher.
She was thrilled.
As the morning routine unfolded, tragedy struck. Kenzie's 7-year-old daughter, Janessa, found her mother lying unresponsive in her bedroom. Kenzie had been shot in the back of the head at close range with a shotgun. The unborn baby, just weeks away from being born, did not survive.
9 a.m., tree trimmers arrived to work around the house. A short time later, a tree trimmer sees Adeline in the doorway, sobbing. She tells him her mother is dead.
When police arrived, they began their investigation. Their focus quickly shifted to Jordan when they discovered that his youth-sized 20-gauge shotgun, a Christmas gift from his father, had been recently fired. Investigators believed Jordan had taken the weapon, shot Kenzie as she slept, and then boarded the school bus as if nothing had happened. Jordan, however, denied any involvement in the crime, insisting he had gone straight to school that morning and had nothing to do with what had happened.
February 2009, 26-year-old Kenzie Hauk found dead in her rural Pennsylvania farmhouse. She was 8.5 months pregnant. The suspect, her 11-year-old soon-to-be stepson, Jordan Brown.
Within hours, Jordan was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Kenzie and 1 for her unborn baby. The case immediately made headlines, with Jordan being labeled as one of the youngest individuals in the U.S. ever to face such serious charges.
Less than 24 hours later, state police arrested Jordan, accusing him of using his shotgun, a hunting gift from his dad, to fire 1 fatal bullet to the back of her head.
Prosecutors argued that Jordan's motive stemmed from jealousy and anger towards Kenzie and her unborn child. They claimed that Jordan had walked into Kenzie's bedroom, fired the fatal shot, and calmly continued his morning routine to avoid suspicion.
3 years after his arrest, a now 14-year-old Jordan is found guilty in juvenile court of double homicide.
Obviously, the police believe that you killed Kenzie. Did you kill Kenzie?
No.
But the defense painted a starkly different picture. They argued that the evidence against Jordan was purely circumstantial and riddled with inconsistencies. There were no witnesses to the crime, no physical evidence tying Jordan to the shooting, and no blood or gunpowder residue on his clothing. As the trial proceeded, it became clear that investigators had based much of their case on the testimony of Janessa, Kenzie's 7-year-old daughter. Janessa claimed she heard a loud boom before seeing Jordan leave Kenzie's room that morning. However, the reliability of her statement was called into question due to her young age and potential influence from adults around her.
I was crying in the picture. I was crying that whole night. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know where I was at, like what was going on or anything.
Did you understand what you stood accused of?
No, I didn't understand.
Despite these uncertainties, Jordan was found guilty in 2012 by a juvenile court judge, a decision that left many questioning the fairness of the investigation and the trial.
The last court proceeding on this matter was actually just this past Friday. The judge now has 20 days to determine whether or not the young boy will be tried as an adult. 2 families now awaiting a decision in a case that has stunned a small town in Pennsylvania.
Jordan spent years in a juvenile detention center, growing from a boy into a young man while maintaining his innocence. In 2018, nearly a decade after the crime, Jordan's conviction was overturned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The court ruled that the evidence presented during his trial was insufficient to support the guilty verdict, effectively exonerating him.
Brown was convicted of shooting and killing his father's pregnant fiancée. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court threw out the conviction, saying there was insufficient evidence.
Jordan was finally free, but the damage had been done. He had lost his childhood, spending crucial developmental years behind bars for a crime he insisted he didn't commit.
Pennsylvania's Supreme Court sides with Jordan, writing that the prosecution had presented insufficient evidence. Jordan's conviction overturned.
Everything's gone. That made me happy, and then the truth finally got out.
In the years since his release, Jordan has worked to rebuild his life, but the stigma of the case continues to follow him. He has filed a civil lawsuit against the police and prosecutors involved in his arrest, alleging that their rushed investigation and flawed evidence robbed him of his youth.
No, I'm not angry. I mean, I think the whole, what happened and the way it happened is BS, but I'm not. Can I say that?
Now 21, Jordan says he's determined to focus on brighter days ahead.
We're just here to support Jordan because we know he's innocent. We believe in him, and we'd like to get through this stage so that they can find the real killer and actually give some justice to baby Christopher and Kenzie.
The courtroom reactions throughout Jordan's trials and appeals were a mix of heartbreak and outrage. Kenzie's family remained steadfast in their belief that Jordan was responsible, while Jordan's father, Chris Brown, stood by his son's innocence from the very beginning.
The victim's mom and dad, Deb and Jack Hoke, are troubled by what they see inside and outside the courtroom.
There's absolutely no emotion on their side. I don't know.
For many, the case of Jordan Brown raised critical questions about the justice system. Should an 11-year-old ever have been charged with first-degree murder based on circumstantial evidence? Did the rush to solve Kenzie's murder lead to an innocent child being wrongly accused? To this day, the case remains one of the most controversial in recent history, serving as a stark reminder of the complexities of justice when children are at the center of tragedy. Next is the case of Alex King, a young boy whose shocking actions raised unsettling questions about influence, responsibility, and the consequences of a fractured home.
Stand currently is Alex King. He is one of the young men accused of actually brutally beating or helping to beat his father to death.
On November 26, 2001 in Cantonment, Florida, Terry Lee King, a 40-year-old father, was bludgeoned to death by his two sons, 13-year-old Derek and 12-year-old Alex King. The boys committed the murder and then set fire to their family's home to hide their crime. Derek and Alex, two young brothers, lived in fear of their father, whom they claimed subjected them to relentless mental mistreatment. The boys said their father would often stare them down and punish them with harsh spankings, leaving deep emotional scars. Eventually, this mistreatment pushed them to a breaking point, leading to a horrific act, the murder of their father. In the beginning, the brothers insisted they acted alone, driven by years of torment. But as the investigation progressed, their story began to shift, becoming more complicated with each retelling.
Were influenced by another man named Ricky Chavez.
They soon accused Ricky Chavez, a family friend, of manipulating them into committing the crime. According to Derek and Alex, Chavez had convinced them to take such drastic measures and even suggested that he, not they, was responsible for their father's death. To further complicate the case, Chavez faced accusations of molesting Alex, though he was acquitted in a separate trial. The brothers' changing accounts and the dark secrets of their family made the case all the more tragic, leaving a community grappling with questions about the depths of the boys' suffering and the truth behind the murder they committed. After the tragic murder, the King brothers found themselves in the spotlight of a highly publicized trial. In a twist of legal proceedings, the court made the unusual decision to try both Chavez and the King brothers together. As the trial unfolded, Chavez was acquitted, but the King brothers faced a much harsher fate. Initially, they were convicted of second-degree murder, their fate seemingly sealed.
Older brother Derek is now 14. Alex, just a year younger, turned 13 last month. Despite their youth, the boys will be tried as adults for their father's murder.
However, a surprising turn of events occurred when the judge determined that their due process rights had been violated, a ruling that led to their conviction being overturned. This unexpected development set the stage for a significant shift in the legal battle. Instead of a lengthy retrial, the King brothers entered into mediation. After much deliberation, they decided to plead guilty to a lesser charge of third-degree murder. The decision came in November 2002, marking the conclusion of a long and tumultuous legal journey. Though the brothers faced the consequences of their actions, the process was far from straightforward, leaving behind a complex story of justice, legal action, and the pursuit of fairness in the courtroom. Derek and Alex King were both sentenced to prison. Derek received 8 years, and Alex was given 7 years. In 2008, Alex was released after serving 6 years, and Derek was released in 2009 after serving 7 years. Both men walked out of prison, each carrying the weight of their past, but hopeful for a second chance at life.
We did make a mistake. However, there are a select few individuals who decide to have faith and just blindly hope in.
The case drew widespread attention, sparking debates about whether the brothers were truly victims of mistreatment or if they had acted out of anger. A book was published claiming the boys were innocent, while others believed the truth was more complicated. The emotional aftermath of the case continues to fuel controversy and mixed opinions, especially regarding the boys' motives and the justice they received. Up next, John Tothro's chilling actions reveal the devastating impact of manipulation and unchecked power, leaving a trail of destruction. In May 2022, police officers were called to a home in York County, South Carolina, because they believed an armed intruder was present. The house belonged to Kenny and Alethea Tothro and their 14-year-old son, John Tothro. On the unfortunate day, Kenny kissed his wife and son goodbye, not knowing that this was the last day anything would be peaceful in his life again. He had checked in with his wife around lunch and told her he would see her later. In a later interview, he said, "Little did I know all hell would break loose in my home." When Kenny was on his way back home, he was horrified to see that a SWAT team had shut down his entire street. To make matters worse, he was informed that his home was why this happened. What he was told completely turned his life upside down. His wife, Alethea, had been shot 12 times and had died from those wounds. What made this even worse was that his son, 14-year-old John, was the one who killed his wife. Finding out that his son had murdered his mother changed his life completely. John himself was charged with murder and arrested as a juvenile. The motive for the crime was never given. Initially, John's name was also withheld from the public. By September 2023, John was already 16 when he was finally tried as an adult due to a complicated plea deal he took. The solicitor's office reduced John's charges to voluntary manslaughter and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime.
How could you still love your son? Very simple. My son was a gift from God.
During his sentencing, his father pleaded with the court to give his son a second chance at life and asked that he should not get life in prison. In court, Kenny Tothrow talked about how his son was a gift. He said that he felt that people would ask him why he still loved his son after what he did to his mother. However, he simply said that he did because God gave him his son. While John didn't say anything in court, he looked really small as he was led through the court proceedings. In the clips that were available of him, he had an expression that could be interpreted as fear. Ultimately, John was sentenced to 28 years in prison. According to the judge, he could only be released before his sentence is up if he served up to 85%. His father expressed the pain of knowing that he'll never be able to go to a game with his son or even see him outside again since he was almost 60 at the time of his son's sentencing. Kenny hugged his son tightly before he was led away. Up next, Robert and Michael Beaver's horrifying crime shattered their own family, exposing a dark and twisted bond between two brothers with deadly intentions.
Broken Arrow, Oklahoma has 1, maybe 2 murders a year, but tonight this community is reeling from 5, the worst crime anyone here can remember.
In 2015, the quiet town of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma was rocked by a shocking crime involving the Beaver family. Daniel and April Beaver were a seemingly ordinary couple, raising their 5 children in a modest home. But beneath this facade, a darker truth lurked. The Beavers were a close-knit unit, with Robert, Michael, Crystal, Daniel, Christopher, Victoria, and Autumn making up their brood. Those who knew the family described them as quiet and withdrawn, preferring to keep to themselves. The children, homeschooled by their parents, were rarely seen interacting with other children in the neighborhood. Despite their seemingly innocent exterior, rumors about the Beaver brothers, Robert and Michael, began to circulate. There was something unsettling about them, but no one could put their finger on it.
Police don't yet have a motive, one calling this the worst single criminal event in this town's history.
On July 21, 2015, Robert and Michael Beaver collected body armor and knives, hatching a plan to carry out a horrific act of violence. These two brothers were plotting to murder their family the very next day. Around 11:30 p.m., Robert and Michael enacted their deadly plan, starting with a horrifying act of violence. They slit their 13-year-old sister Crystal's throat, leaving her fighting for her life. Crystal fought against her brothers, escaping the bedroom and running for the front door, but her siblings were not about to let her escape. They dragged her back inside the house and unleashed an even more brutal assault on her. The extent of Crystal's injuries were horrifying, with her internal organs almost spilling out. Incredibly, she survived this brutal assault, but the rest of the family was not so lucky. Robert and Michael went on a rampage, brutally murdering their parents and siblings. Robert, in a fit of rage, fatally stabbed his mother, April, a staggering 48 times. While Christopher and Victoria Beaver were hiding in the bathroom during the assault, using a clever ruse, Michael pretended to be scared and a victim, knocking on the door and pleading for help. Christopher decided to open the door and allow Michael inside, thinking it was a matter of safety. Instead of seeking safety, Michael turned on his unsuspecting siblings, fatally stabbing each of them over 20 times. With his bloodlust seemingly sated, Michael turned to his father's home office, where his younger brother Daniel was hiding. Once again, he employed the same ruse, pretending to be a victim chased by Robert. Daniel opened the door, allowing Michael to enter. As Michael stepped into his father's office, he turned towards Robert, their other brother, and uttered chilling words. "He's all yours." In a moment of pure madness, Robert turned his knife on his younger brother Daniel and stabbed him in the stomach, chest, head, and back. Daniel Beaver woke up and found himself face to face with his son, Robert. In a matter of seconds, he lunged at his father's throat and stabbed his father repeatedly, 28 times, leaving him lifeless. After committing these heinous crimes, Robert and his brother Michael fled the scene, fleeing out the back door and into the woods that surrounded the house. They knew that the authorities would soon be on their trail, and they had no intentions of getting caught. Daniel Beaver, as he died, called 911. As police officers walked towards the front door, they noticed a pool of blood on the porch. With their hearts pounding, they knocked repeatedly on the door, calling out for any survivors. After an eternity, the officers heard a faint voice calling for help. Breaking down the door, they entered to find 13-year-old Crystal lying in a puddle of her blood. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save her life. When Crystal was stable, she identified her brothers as the assailants. In addition to Crystal, only 2-year-old Autumn managed to escape the relentless violence, miraculously escaping with her life. But the rest of the family was gone, their lives ripped away in the most horrific way imaginable. Robert and Michael were arrested at 12:18 a.m. Officers apprehended the brothers using a canine unit after they were discovered hiding in a bush. They had each been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. Michael, at 16, was tried as an adult, a decision that sparked controversy among legal professionals. His attorney argued that charging him as an adult was unconstitutional, stating that if convicted, he would be doomed to die in prison. Such an outcome, the attorney claimed, was effectively the same as a death sentence. The attorney contended that there was abuse in the Beaver household. However, no concrete evidence was provided to show that there was abuse within the Beaver household. Initially, Robert and Michael pleaded not guilty, maintaining their innocence in the face of overwhelming odds. While incarcerated, Robert dared to take his own life. However, fate intervened when a guard stumbled upon him in the nick of time. Robert pleaded guilty to all charges and was given 5 life sentences without parole, as well as an additional life term. Michael's trial began in April 2018. After 1 month of deliberation, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to 5 life sentences with parole. Robert, who should have been safely locked away behind bars, attempted to attack 2 prison officers in the day room in 2019. This incident resulted in him receiving 3 more life terms, bringing his total amount of life sentences to 9. Robert and Michael are serving their sentences at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center and the Lexington Correctional Center, respectively, in Lexington, Oklahoma. The crimes committed by these young killers left scars that will never heal, shocking their families, their communities, and the world. Their courtroom reactions revealed the true weight of their actions, but these stories are only the beginning. The next video on screen uncovers even more chilling cases and the sentences that left everyone speechless.